Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Ottawa confirms that the two Michaels being held captive in China will be going to trial soon on charges of spying. There's been a delay of more COVID-19 vaccines coming to Alberta. We have an update from Dr. Dina Hinshaw. And a Legion in Lethbridge is receiving some emergency federal funding. We hear from Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder, who has the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau has confirmed that the two Canadians being held captive in China will be going to trial. Both Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig have been in Chinese custody for more than 2 years. They are charged with spying. Garneau says Spavor's court hearing is due to take place on Friday, while Kovrig's court appearance is scheduled for Monday. Garneau says the detentions are arbitrary and remain deeply troubling by the lack of transparency surrounding the proceedings. Guy Saint-Jacques, a former Canadian ambassador to China, says the odds are stacked against the two Michaels. He says once you're formally charged in China, you're found guilty in more than 99% of the cases. With COVID-19 cases, particularly variants, increasing in some parts of Canada, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health is advising against any travel plans outside of Alberta during spring break. Dr. Dina Hinshaw says unnecessary travel increases the risk of spreading the virus. She says while vaccines are now available, the province is still far from the point of where immunization will curtail severe outcomes connected to COVID-19. Hinshaw also says that the arrival of some of the vaccines has been delayed due to mechanical problems.
We have now administered more than 397,500 doses of vaccine in our province. I want to thank Albertans for their patience as we book appointments. We are dealing with a supply chain that sometimes changes quickly without warning, and we are working to get doses out as quickly as possible. This means that sometimes there will be minor changes when unexpected events occur. For example, a shipment of Moderna vaccine that was set to arrive in Alberta earlier this week was grounded outside the province due to mechanical issues on an airplane. As a result, this has delayed the shipments to 43 pharmacies, which will get their vaccines a few days later than expected.
Over the last 24 hours, the province says there were 505 new cases of COVID-19 identified. There are 264 people in hospital, including 43 in intensive care. There are 5,084 active cases in the province. Now to date, 133,086 Albertans have recovered from the novel coronavirus. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines through participating community pharmacies is growing. Kenney says this week the number of pharmacies delivering the vaccine has more than doubled and is set to grow even further.
There are now 259 pharmacies in 107 communities administering thousands of doses every day. The number of participating pharmacies has grown by 154% since March 1st. These pharmacies are rapidly increasing our ability to immunize people as quickly and as safely as possible. More than 66,000 doses will likely be delivered at Alberta pharmacies this week alone.
Scientists say a rare pulmonary disease linked to bats has been discovered in Alberta. Infectious disease experts at the University of Alberta have found a fungal lung infection transmitted through bat and bird droppings. The infection is usually found in parts of southern Ontario and Quebec. A spokesperson at the U of A says researchers were surprised at how many cases were locally acquired because the disease has been considered to be travel-related. 15 of 45 confirmed cases from 2011 and 2018 were mostly acquired in rural areas of central Alberta. Angus Reid has come out with a new poll asking if Albertans are in favor of the province implementing a provincial sales tax. Now, most people I've spoken to are not in favor of the idea at all. They say, forget it, no chance. And Premier Jason Kenney says he would host a referendum on the topic. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, says when it comes to the thought of a new tax, the poll says some Albertans actually support the idea to help balance the books.
In those that make more than $100,000, what Angus Reid found was that about 45% of them actually support a PST. And then if you go to the other end of the spectrum, those making $50,000 a year or less, only 35% of them support it. The idea that a progressive sales tax, a provincial sales tax is not in fact progressive, affects the poor more than the wealthy.
Tyler Dawson will also have more details on the government's recall legislation, which allows Albertans to fire their local politicians. That Q&A is coming up later in our broadcast. The father of a player who died in the Humboldt Broncos bus crash says he's not happy about a private member's bill to increase speed limits on some Alberta highways. Toby Boulay, the father of the late Logan Boulay, says a bill to increase speed limits from 110 to 120 kilometers an hour on divided highways will lead to more deaths. He says he would rather see another private member's bill aimed at improving organ and tissue donation move forward. His son Logan Boulay signed his organ donor card, and his organs helped to save 6 people following the tragic bus crash 2 years ago near Tisdale, Saskatchewan. Alberta's Environment Minister says there's no threat to water supplies or quality of water in the southern part of the province, despite plans to expand the coal industry. A resolution passed at a convention of rural municipalities yesterday said the province changed the water policy to benefit a proposed open-pit coal mine in the Rockies without consultation. When asked about it, Minister Jason Nixon says the environmental rules remain the same despite changes to water allocation from rivers. He also suggested concerns about water supplies are the result of misinformation. Our country's agriculture minister says she's still waiting to hear back from the prairie provinces on proposed changes to a program protecting farmers against large declines in income. Marie-Claude Bebeau says changes to the agri-stability program would increase payouts for production losses, increase costs and effects from market conditions. Ottawa would continue to pay 60% of the costs, but the province would have to pick up the rest. Bebeau says Ottawa has received a positive response from other provinces, but the status quo will continue if the prairie provinces don't agree. The Royal Canadian General Stewart branch in Lethbridge is receiving emergency funding of almost $11,000. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder was at the Legion earlier on Thursday to make the announcement.
I think one of the really important things about today was having the opportunity to acknowledge funding that's come from the federal government toward the Legion to help in the good work that they're doing to serve our community here in Lethbridge. We have veterans, as young as 18 and as old as 102 who come to the Legion for various levels of support. And so to make sure that this place is well funded and has the ability to give back to our community and especially to our veterans and their families is incredibly important.
This would be a good opportunity for us to show our support of each other and also bring the membership up to date, about the support of the Legion so that we can continue existing and support veterans, which is what our chief role is. Essentially, the board of the branch discusses where the money will actually go to.
Lethbridge College's Nasatipi strategy reaffirms the college's commitment to making Indigenous education a priority. It marks a new point in their ongoing journey to support Indigenous students and the local Indigenous community. Today, that strategy was unveiled.
Today was a momentous occasion in Lethbridge College's history. We officially launched our institutional strategy entitled Coming Together in a Holistic Way. And this was just an amazing time because not only did we move from an operational strategy, but to an institutional strategy. So that means everyone in Lethbridge College as a whole has a role to play. So no matter if they're part of Indigenous services, if they're part of our leadership, if they're a frontline worker, we really want this to be a collective environment moving forward and making Indigenous education a priority.
Back in January, Lethbridge City Council passed the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Work Plan, which provided $435,000 to Indigenous relations in the city. The group has partnered with the University of Lethbridge to roll out 3 available positions. With just a few weeks left to apply, the city's hoping to provide opportunities for young Indigenous women.
We're also trying to focus on STEAM opportunities. So we know particularly women, whether Indigenous or not, are disproportionately not able to access, careers in the sciences, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And so we're trying to also at the same time think about how we can set Indigenous youth up for success, particularly Indigenous women youth.
Lethbridge Indigenous Relations Advisor Perry Stein also shared some exciting news for the Indigenous hockey community in southern Alberta. Usually, the Alberta Treaty Hockey Provincials take place in Calgary. Now, the city is working with its organizers to bring the large-scale event here to Lethbridge.
We're anticipating if the tournament was to go ahead in its kind of typical non-COVID fashion, that there would be thousands of athletes and family members and officials and coaches and the like participating in that over a couple-day span. Likely it would take up all of the rinks in the city, so we'd have to coordinate carefully with our partners in minor hockey and other organizations to make sure that works. But I mean, this would be a wonderful opportunity. We would think that it would probably take up all the rinks in Lethbridge, like I said, but also take up some of the sheets of ice in Standoff too.
With uncertainty surrounding restrictions, the group is hoping to host the event in the fall, but concrete dates have not yet been established. The gardening industry has seen a spike in popularity during the pandemic, and 2021 is expected to be another very busy year. While it's still a bit early to get your gardening tools out, experts say now is a good time to plan what you're wanting to plant so you're ready to go when the weather warms up even more. And the greenhouses are getting even busier.
Super busy. We are so excited. We're planting seeds in the greenhouse. Our tomatoes are growing, our peppers. We're looking forward to this year. And everyone has spring fever already. People are really interested in vegetable gardening. We had our first batch of potatoes and onions come in, and they went really fast. We've got more coming weekly. But I can see the trend is planting gardens. People want to grow their own food. It's good to kind of fix the soil up, add amendments, add peat moss, add different composts and things like that. Let's get the ground ready. And working the ground, you can do it at any time. Too early to plant. We don't recommend planting annuals actually until after a long weekend in May, but there's lots of things you can do before that. And there's perennials, there's trees and shrubs that will be arriving in the middle of April. So it seems a little early now, but there's lots of prep time. You can also be pruning trees and ask your experts on how to do things.
Smith said sourcing local seeds could also mean a higher chance of success for your garden. The pandemic has proven to be a hot time for first-time home buyers. A recent report by Royal LePage says that nearly half of Canadians aged 25 to 35 own their own home, and 25% of those homeowners purchased their property during the pandemic. Experts say that this is because of the low interest rates, including a 5-year closed mortgage for under 2%, making it a lot easier for first-time homebuyers to get a mortgage. Lethbridge mortgage broker Kim Verkervich shared what she is seeing here in Lethbridge.
It's more attractive to a first-time homebuyer, and I even see a lot of parents wanting to help out their young adult kids, with gifting. I'm seeing a lot of gifting for down payment to help their kids, get into their first home because of the rates so low. So the market is definitely booming, and it's just lots of demand for real estate right now. And I think a lot of the realtors are having a hard time keeping up with product because there's just not enough product out there. Everything seems to be selling quite fast. And I've talked to some realtors and they've had bidding wars on homes, so it's definitely a hot market right now.
Since the pandemic, Alberta's seen the highest amount of first-time homebuyers in the country, specifically in Calgary and Edmonton. High school sports and games are still not allowed as part of the Alberta government's COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions. A petition called Let Us Play Alberta was launched by a local young man. Timothy Holthe is calling on the UCP government to fully open all high school sports and to allow for students to play once again. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan NEUDORF says there are still steps that need to be taken before the restrictions can be lifted.
I really applaud him for using his voice and making that more well known. And obviously it's something that we want to work towards while still protecting people's physical health. I think in Lethbridge in particular, we've seen with the good weather and with a long run of actually very low numbers that how quickly a little bit of complacency can see those numbers rise at a dramatic rate. So we've got to get those in hand again as best we can before we can see some more steps in the restrictions easing.
A lot of my friends and I, we've put a lot of time into basketball, especially for me. And I know like friends and family, they've also put time into football or whatever. And it's been greatly impacted by COVID. It helps us build these connections. And so with the petition, all we really want is for sports to be opened up again, where we can go and we can play other towns and kind of get our name out there.
The Let Us Play petition has now garnered over 100 signatures. Lethbridge police have charged 2 people following arrests that were made in the hamlet of Granham on Tuesday. Police also recovered stolen property worth $120,000, including 6 vehicles and weapons. 36-year-old Nicholas Scout and 29-year-old Tila Scout of Lethbridge face various charges, including possession of stolen property and resisting arrest. Nicholas Scout will appear in court on Friday, while Tila will appear in court on April the 12th. Many of us have heard the expression woke culture or woke ideology. It refers to a perceived awareness of issues that concern social justice and racial justice. Barbara Kay is an award-winning columnist with the National Post. Kay says woke ideology is now being taught in many elementary schools, and thanks to the woke culture, the definition of racism appears to have changed.
When people say the word racism to people of certainly of my generation, we think of Martin Luther King, who said we should be judged by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. And that was our idea of being anti-racism. Yes, treat everybody like an individual. Now we've come full circle to treat people only according to the color of their skin or their ethnicity or their disability or their whatever box they fit into.
Catch the full interview with Barbara Kay from the National Post and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up after Business News. BC Premier John Horgan has announced an additional $30 million for small businesses which were hit hard during the pandemic. The funds will help those business owners to create online stores.
In February, just a few weeks ago, when we launched Online BC, or the Launch Online program, we put $12 million in place, and we assumed that that would mean $7,500 grants for businesses that were eligible. Well, we've had over 3,500 applications. We've exhausted the initial $12 million, and we are announcing today an additional $30 million to expand the program and include not just those who are selling a good, but those that are also selling services.
Premier Horgan also defended the province's decision to allow small outdoor gatherings amid growing numbers of variants. The union representing frontline electrical workers at Manitoba Hydro say a strike has been averted for now. Hydro said it tabled a final offer on Wednesday evening and hoped leadership would take the offer to its members for a vote. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local Union 2034, says it is currently reviewing the offer. The union noted that the ballots are being prepared and the membership will vote on it in the next few days. The union represents 2,300 employees. Manitoba Hydro workers have been without a contract for more than 2 years. The City of Toronto, which was hit hard during the COVID-19 pandemic, is now running mass immunization clinics. The 3 city-operated clinics began accepting patients over the age of 80 for their COVID-19 vaccinations.
I did notice that they have about, 15 or 16 tables, and there was only about 4 or 5 being used because of the slowness of us getting in. I can see my granddaughter who brought me today, and I can see my family, which I haven't been able to see except outside, and it's been a bit cold to be outside.
It was very well organized. Given that it was their first hour operation, I was very happy to see the way they were organized. I'm very happy, very happy. I think everybody should who has any opportunity to get a vaccine to have it. I mean, it gives you a much greater sense of confidence.
Well, the warm temperatures continued for much of southwestern Alberta again today, and that trend will continue into the weekend. Complete weather details are coming up. You know, if you think about it, there's really no need to even leave southern Alberta, especially during spring break with the beautiful weather we've been seeing lately. It's been incredible. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, are we getting close to breaking any records?
Yeah, well, the closest we'll be getting to breaking any records, Hal, is today. So our record high for today was 18.2 degrees. That happened back in 2004. And our high today was 18. So did we make it? Close. We're very, very close. We're still dealing with gusty winds as well, too. So overnight, we're going to be seeing those winds continue to gust up to 50 kilometers per hour. Overnight low tonight, 5 degrees. Into tomorrow, 15 degrees, but we're still dealing with those winds. Could get up to 60 kilometer per hour gusts by tomorrow afternoon. Friday, that would be a mix of sun and cloud tomorrow. Into Saturday, beautiful sunny weather, but windy. 13 degrees is our high. 9 degrees our high for Sunday with a mix of sun and cloud. 11 on Monday, 8 degrees on Tuesday, and rounding out into next Wednesday at 12 degrees is our high. So these above average seasonal, it's definitely higher than seasonal averages. 6 degrees being our average high, -6 the average low. 18 degrees was our high temperature back in 2004. And in 1965, we had our chilliest day. which was minus 25. 7:38 is when the sun rose this morning. Our sun set this evening right at 7:40 p.m., so giving us very close to 12 hours of daylight. Over on the west coast tomorrow, going to be a rainy one, 70% chance of showers and a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm in both Victoria and Vancouver. Both of those cities sitting at 10 degrees the high, 13 degrees the high for Edmonton tomorrow, and 12 for Calgary. Lots of sunshine in Calgary tomorrow. Also not as much wind, about 20 km/h gusts in both Edmonton and Calgary. Now in the rest of the prairies, Saskatoon and Regina, lots of sunshine, temperature finally getting into the teens. Nice to see those UV indexes as well finally instead of the wind chill factors. 15 for Regina, 13 degrees the high in Winnipeg. Winnipeg also experiencing some 60 km/h wind gusts, so a little bit windy there. This whole area of the country, beautiful tomorrow. Sunshine, not as much wind, 5 degrees the high for Toronto, 2 for Ottawa, -1 for Montreal, and the wind not as much of a factor as it has been earlier this week. Now, winter-like conditions continue in the East Coast. All of these cities actually experiencing overnight rain and flurries tonight into tomorrow. Halifax and Charlottetown are still going to be experiencing quite a bit of snowfall into the afternoon. Halifax particularly 10 to 15 centimeters of snow. St. John's under a rainfall warning. They could get up to 25 millimeters of rainfall tomorrow. 7 degrees is the high there. So there you go. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by ColumbianDirect.com. Cafe Coffee, specialty coffee from our family to yours.
21 U.S. states are going to court to try and overturn U.S. President Joe Biden's cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline from Alberta. The lawsuit filed in Texas says Biden overstepped his authority when he revoked the permit for Keystone on his first day in office. The suit claims because the 1,900-kilometer pipeline would run through multiple states, Congress should have the final say over whether it's being built. Construction on the Alberta to Nebraska line began last year when Donald Trump revived the project that stalled under the Obama administration. Biden canceled the permit over concerns that burning oil sands crude would make climate change even worse. A Calgary-based company says it has secured funding needed to proceed with a commercial pilot project of a cleaner and cheaper way to produce heavy oil from oil sands. As Celaware is investigating the use of radio frequency energy to heat an underground oil-bearing reservoir to mobilize the heavy oil and allow it to flow into a well to be pumped to the surface. That would eliminate the need for injecting steam, as it is currently used extensively in the oil sands. The company says it expects construction at the test site to be completed by June after it received a commitment of $5 million from Alberta Innovates, bringing its direct funding to $19 million. Restaurant operators are calling it a do-or-die moment for the food industry as the threat of a third wave of COVID-19 pandemic looms across Canada. A spokesperson for Restaurants Canada says another lockdown could force many restaurants to close their doors for good. James Roulette says the average restaurant loses around $30,000 every time a lockdown is implemented. Canada's already lost more than 10,000 restaurants over the past year. One of the biggest movie theater chains in the United States is raising the curtain. AMC says it will have 98% of its U.S. theaters open by tomorrow. The company had already opened more than 500 theaters across the country with safety protocols in place, including mandatory masking and upgraded air filtration. Shares in AMC were up more than 4% before the markets opened on the news. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 146 points on the day to finish at 18,836. The Dow was down 153 points to 32,862. The S&P 500 was down 58 points to 3915, and the Nasdaq was down 409 points on the day to 13,116. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $5 to $59.60 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $2.48 US. Gold was down a cent to $17.3640 US an ounce, and silver was also down a cent to $26.06 US an ounce. Wheat is at $305 per metric ton, barley's at $308, canola's at $771, and corn is at $337 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 85 cents to $118.58. Feeder cattle were down $1.40 to $135.53, and lean hogs were up 63 cents to $94.30. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 80.08 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau has confirmed that the 2 Canadians being held captive in China will be going to trial. Both Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig have been in Chinese custody for more than 2 years, having been charged with spying. Garneau says Spavor's court hearing is due to take place on Friday, while Kovrig's court appearance is scheduled for Monday. So what exactly is involved with the province's recall legislation? You know, the bill that allows you to fire your local politician? Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will explain what's involved with the recall legislation in just a moment. There appears to be a defining crisis in Alberta politics this week, and it involves Bigfoot. Yeah, there's a Netflix movie where Bigfoot vanishes and his family goes out to save him. Now, the bad guy in the movie is the oil industry. The Alberta War Room launched a campaign telling Netflix, listen guys, you got to tell the truth, enough of this. And to talk more about this in detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me from Edmonton. Tyler, the UCP have been attacking the film while the NDP say the attack really is a national embarrassment.
Certainly, this is, as you say, the big crisis in Alberta politics right now. Netflix family film, it's called Bigfoot Family. The gist of it, Bigfoot goes missing, and the family goes after him. They end up sort of entangled with this resource extraction oil company in Alaska. Now, part of it is that they plan to extract oil by dropping bombs and things like that, which, funnily enough, actually was a strategy considered in Alberta back in the 50s. But anyways, the War Room launched an attack. It says, tell Netflix to tell the truth. You know, a few thousand people have signed this letter saying it's spreading misinformation about the oil and gas industry. You know, this happened, I think, late last week. And, you know, admittedly, a bunch of us were sort of scratching our heads to just, you know, double checking to make sure this was a real thing and not, you know, a joke. But no, it was real. And the Premier's been out defending the attack by the War Room against Netflix, the Energy Minister, and the NDP, as you say, saying, come on, you guys, you're going after a kid's film. Do you want the Lorax ban next? So it's been a little bit of drama over this, but, you know, maybe on the flip side, it's a little bit lighter fare than we're usually seeing on the political front these days.
But you know something, Tyler? I'm thinking people are going after Dr. Seuss lately. They went after Mr. Potato Head. Hey, why not? Take a shot at a kid's movie too, kid's film too, right?
May as well, I suppose, yeah.
More people have been discussing the potential of a sales tax here in Alberta. I have to be careful I don't say those words too loudly. But polling from Angus Reid says even if academics like the idea, the majority of Albertans do not, and that includes supporters of both the UCP and the NDP.
Yeah, if you take it all the way across the board, about 62% of Albertans don't want a sales tax of any size. So that would be 1 to 2%, 3 or 4, 5 or more. Nobody is really that fond of it. Now, of course, you could flip that poll on its head and say, oh, 38% of Albertans actually do want a sales tax, a sizable minority. You could frame it that way. But what is sort of relevant about this majority, this solid majority of people that don't want it across all age groups, and I should say more or less across all income levels, is that Jason Kenney has said if there is going to be a PST in this province, it's going to come in via referendum, which of course means that the majority view in polling is going to matter. And there is a little bit of variation. For example, in those that make more than $100,000, what Angus Reid found was that about 45% of them actually support a PST. And then if you go to the other end of the spectrum, those making $50,000 a year or less, only 35% of them support it. The idea that a progressive sales tax, a provincial sales tax is not in fact progressive, affects the poor more than the wealthy. So strong headwinds ahead should any government ever actually get around to attempting to put in a PST. But as we talked about the other week, political suicide tax. So we'll have to see if anyone ever tries to give it a go.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would take away the Alberta advantage, definitely. The only province in Canada without a PST. Now, there's also been a discussion on budget estimates, Tyler. Now, it appears as though we will not be able to balance the budget in Alberta for quite some time here. Alberta is still coming out of the recession, plus we've had the COVID-19 pandemic. In question period in QP, the talk was about homelessness and municipal spending. Tell me more.
That's right. So there's sort of the estimates in the budget, the numbers in the budget that we've all seen. There are sort of discussions ongoing about all of that, where they sort of dig into the numbers a little bit more. So there's been questions, as you said, about, you know, funding for homelessness, funding for housing, municipal transfers. The War Room, of course, came up this week because they were asking about how much the War Room is being paid to do its job. So it's just, the budget conversation, I guess what I'm trying to say is continuing and is a subject of discussion within the legislature, and that's eating up a fair amount of time in question period, in between all the usual fun mudslinging that is happening.
Now, the UCP has gone through a rewrite of the education curriculum, and in the Northwest Territories, students there actually learn the Alberta curriculum, and the NDPs say that with the UCP rewrite, educators in the Territories may be dropping the curriculum? Or, Tyler, is that a bit of an inaccurate speculation?
Well, it's a little bit unclear. You're right. The NDP has said that they've been told by sources, I guess, in the Northwest Territories government that they are going to switch to the British Columbia curriculum. Now, inaccurate speculation is exactly what the education minister in Alberta called it, saying that this is part of an ongoing and normal review that the territory does. And that part of it is true as well. The territory is going through a normal review, and it's looking at curricula in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Yukon, and Nunavut. So it remains to be seen a little bit whether or not they actually switch to another curriculum or if they keep Alberta's. Now, this, of course, goes all the way back to this controversy we had some time ago when the curriculum review panel ended up in controversy because of some of the people who'd been on the panel who critics felt had, I guess you might say, socially conservative or historically conservative views. So it's just a little bit of a way, I suppose, that the NDP is keeping some of the air in the sails on the education controversy, so to speak. But as of this exact moment, of course, we don't actually know for sure what the Northwest Territories is going to do.
Here's a question as well. Why don't educators and legislators in the Northwest Territories write their own curriculum, education curriculum?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually have no idea. And I was surprised learning about it that the Yukon and Nunavut do have their own. So it is a bit, actually, honestly, a bit of a mystery to me why they haven't done their own as well.
Tyler, was promised during the last provincial election, and the UCP finally delivered recall legislation. I've asked a couple of politicians about it here, and yeah, it makes them a little bit nervous about it. Now, this would allow locals to potentially fire their MLAs. It would also apply to municipal leaders, including mayors and councillors. Now, explain how this really works, the recall legislation.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated and tricky than it sounds like on the face of it. Now, you'd mentioned that Alberta is the only place without a provincial sales tax. If we got this, a recall, we would be only one of two provinces that has recall legislation, the other one, of course, being British Columbia. Now, the breakdown of how this would go about works like this. In order to set up the recall of a provincial politician, you need 40% of all constituents to sign this recall form, shall we say. This will then lead to a constituency-wide referendum. That referendum is done on a simple majority vote, so 50 plus 1. If the recall side wins, the politician gets yanked and it goes to a by-election. Now, it's a little bit different on the municipal front. A municipal politician can be recalled with 80% of the local voters, but once that comes in, it's finished. They're out. There's no constituency referendum. And it also applies to school board trustees, which has an even lower threshold, I believe, of 40% of voters as well. So it's kind of interesting in the sense that some people are saying, this is anti-democratic because it's way too hard for people to recall their politicians. And then you have other people saying this is anti-democratic, it's way too easy. So it's sort of trying to set, a little bit of a balance where the government obviously wants to have some sort of stability. And if the NDP were in government, certainly they would want this stability as well. But they're also fulfilling this sort of grassroots promise to have recall legislation available. So we'll have to see if it ever gets used because, I mean, it's an awful lot of legwork to get out and collect all those signatures to organize this sort of thing.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, a number of years ago, isn't that how Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California? Because Californians enacted their recall legislation, weren't happy with their governor, fired him, and that's how Schwarzenegger got in? Do you remember that?
I honestly can say I do not remember that, okay. But I would believe it. California, you think Alberta politics are crazy. Man, California's way wilder.
And they had the Terminator for a while, so there you go. Now, Premier Jason Kenney is beaming a little more these days, Tyler, after he said his party has delivered around 75% of their campaign promises, including this recall legislation. Now, you believe that the annual general meeting could get a little rambunctious, maybe 6 months before the next election? Can you explain?
Yeah, that's right. Jason Kenney's going to face a leadership review. So brass tacks of that, the UCP membership's going to decide if they want Jason Kenney to lead their party into the next election. These things are ran from the grassroots of the party. He can't really stop this sort of thing. So it's going to happen. There's no obvious successor to Jason Kenney, obviously. He does have parties tracking to his right. He does have, relatively low approval ratings, but that I don't think is abnormal, sort of midterm and in the middle of a pandemic. But yeah, the party's going to have to think about it. He's going to have to think about it. And of course, the big thing that you mentioned is that it'll only be 6 months before the next election, which would give them very little time to get their house in order if they intend to win that election.
The NDP plans a private members bill here in Alberta that would ban coal mining and exploration on the eastern slopes of the Canadian Rockies. What has the UCP really said about it?
Well, they've been asked about it in question period a couple times recently, and they've basically said that when the NDP was in government, they supported coal exploration, and the UCP government supports coal workers, people in rural communities, things like that. Now, this, of course, is happening in this much larger context about coal exploration and the changes to the 1976 coal policy that they changed and then decided not to change. And I believe now they're doing a sort of public consultation on what to do about coal. But of course, the big issue down in southern Alberta, in the communities west of Lethbridge there. And just on Wednesday, Corb Lund, the country singer, put out another sort of statement video thing saying people need to keep an eye on it. So, what happens with a private members bill is a little bit unclear at this point. It's not likely to wildly change the situation, but it's clear it's going to be a political hot potato, let's say, for the next little while, no doubt about that.
And speaking of country singers, Paul Brandt also came out against a lot of the coal mining too, right? So that's quite interesting there. Tyler, the UCP recently announced that Southern Alberta will be receiving some new schools, including a much-needed elementary school here in Lethbridge on the west side. We have so much high density there, we desperately need one. But Lethbridge isn't the only jurisdiction receiving a new Southern Alberta school.
That is correct. There are 3 all total. The one you mentioned in Lethbridge, and I believe Coaldale and Milk River are also going to get schools. So this is the result of funding set aside for new schools in budget 2021. Around $1 billion, I think, is the number. And the announcement was made just a few days ago. No estimates available yet on what these projects might cost. I believe in 2 cases, at least, it's going to be the demolition of an old school and the building of another one. So, a few years off yet on these projects, but folks in Coaldale, Milk River, and Lethbridge can look forward to new schools, in the next few years at some point.
Yeah, that'll be tremendous. Now let's talk about safety for just a moment here. A private member's bill is suggesting to raise the speed limit on some Alberta highways to 120 kilometers an hour. Some say these highways were specifically engineered for that speed, not 100, not 110, but other experts are saying increasing the speed limit is not a good idea, citing some higher crash stats in BC when they did something similar in 2014. But Tyler, don't most Albertans speed in our highways anyway?
Well, it certainly depends on the highway, I would say. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone on Highway 2 who's going along at the speed limit. But yeah, this would, if it goes ahead, make this sort of change official. So you wouldn't be ticketed for going, 117 anymore. But yes, as you say, British Columbia did this, and some of the experts have sort of said that there is, I think, 180% increase in crashes or something like that because of it. Now, of course, a percent number like that is meaningless to some extent because it could have gone from 2 crashes to 10 crashes and gone up a whopping percentage. But yeah, it's certainly a balance between safety and the efficiency of the highways. So it's an interesting one, though, because as you say, no one actually goes the speed limit. So it'll be interesting to see if politicians, sort of nod to the fact that everyone's already kind of speeding and make it legitimate or not.
It's interesting as well. I've interviewed a lot of police officers over the years who told me that going under the speed limit by 10, 15, 20K, not when it's icy, but dry road conditions, can also cause accidents. So, you're going to speed, you're going to go under the speed limit, maybe just do the speed limit would be safest. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me once again from Edmonton.
Pleasure as always, Hal.
Today, society is being inundated with messages of white privilege, critical race theory, and terms such as intersectional and cultural appropriation. It's all part of what's been termed woke ideology. Much of the media and academia thinks that it's much needed, while many everyday people aren't so sure. Joining us today is Barbara Kay. She's an award-winning columnist with the National Post. She recently wrote an article called Birth of a New Resistance, Parents Mobilize to Tackle Woke Ideology. It's such a long title. She joins me today through Zoom from Montreal. Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeanette.
Absolutely. So your National Post article begins with a real-life story of what's happening at one of the elite private schools in New York City. Now, this is with impressionable students aged 5 to 11. Can you explain what the students are encouraged to do?
Well, the students are being encouraged to become self-aware with regard to their privilege and actually to become activists in fighting anti-racism. And in order to do that, they're being encouraged to watch what other people say and to, basically report on things that they hear that are not correct, or that they consider to be racist, or to constantly examine their own privilege. This is a school, Riverdale Country Day School in New York City, which is probably one of the most elite schools in the nation. I think parents pay something like $40,000. This is an elementary school per year.
Wow.
For their child to go there. And there is diversity in these schools, by the way, because they do give scholarships and they do give, so it's not like they're only white children in the school. And of course, there are wealthy people from other, there are wealthy Black and Hispanic people that also send their children there. So it is elite, but not entirely undiverse.
So it sounds like they're being taught to become like watchdogs almost, or somewhat of an activist, I guess.
Yes, that is part of being woke, is making sure that you monitor the speech of other people. And they told the parents that they were going to be resetting the curriculum to put an emphasis on diversity and they didn't say the word woke, but basically, yeah, and so to encourage, the agenda was going to be heavily on the anti-racism angle. And a few parents weren't thrilled about that. I'm sorry, I left out one of the best things. That was that they were going to encourage the parents to bond with each other in terms of their affinity group, meaning they were going to help the parents to organize friendships amongst people of their own affinity, or basically color or ethnicity. And one parent was very upset about this because he is half Mexican in combination with an indigenous side of him, and half Jewish. And he does not, and he does not consider himself, not looking for an affinity group because he's a typical American, is what the way he felt.
I was just going to say, and aren't Americans like it's a melting pot, right? They're kind of encouraged to be. It used to be. So it seems like that's kind of almost counterintuitive.
Well, it is for people a certain age. I mean, you think when people say the word racism to people certainly of my generation, we think of Martin Luther King, who said we should be judged by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. And that was our idea of being anti-racism. Yes, treat everybody like an individual. Now we've come full circle to treat people only according to the color of their skin or their ethnicity, or their disability, or their whatever box they fit into. And the person, his name is Brian Bartning, who took radical exception to this, his wife is from the Soviet Union. And she grew up, she remembers as a child being encouraged to snitch on her parents to the authorities, and once almost got her parents into trouble by repeating something that they had said. I mean, she understands. Plus, she had her identity stamped into her passport, and not in a good way. So she, both of them, very put off by this. But when they brought their concern to the headmaster or the headmistress, I'm sorry, I forget, they were told, they got a letter saying maybe you should think about whether this is the right school for your child. In other words, if you don't like it, leave. And this kind of attitude is not specific to this school. This is very representative of what's going on around the nation. There was a long article written by an opinion writer who used to be with the New York Times, Barry Weiss, called "The Miseducation of America's Elites." And she interviewed people from all the top schools in New York and LA. Like, I think she went to like 30 different schools. And she got the same story from all of them. And the other part of that same story is that although this couple in Riverdale school were willing to speak up, when they spoke to other concerned parents, the parents all said to them, yeah, we don't like it either, but we're not going to say anything because we don't want to make waves, and we want our child to be accepted. And the unspoken thing was, we don't want to screw up our children's chances of getting into Ivy League universities. And these very elite schools that people pay $40,000 or $50,000 a year to have their children go to, they are conduits to Harvard and Yale and all the top universities, who have made it very clear that they want their incoming freshmen to already be, well, they don't use the word indoctrinated, but they want them to they want them to have that mindset. So that's how they get them. So Barry Weiss, who wrote this article, said whatever's going on in the universities is now also going on in the elite prep schools, because they want them pre-programmed by the time they get to university. It's quite chilling, because it does sound very Soviet.
Doesn't it? Yeah. Now, I know you have so many tons of examples of different schools. I mean, there's another example of a school in San Diego, the Unified School District, where they've instructed white teachers that they're guilty of spirit murdering Black children and they should undergo anti-racist therapy. So I don't know, like, how many people believe that the majority of white teachers need to get therapy, or are racist for that matter. I don't know. I mean, I would think this is having an effect of marginalizing people, or pitting one group against another.
It's certainly pitting one group against another, and it's pitting all groups against white people. In some of the examples from these other schools were children. One mother was looking at an exercise that her child was doing. She was drawing something, and she says, oh, what is that about? And she says, well, I have to draw in my own skin color. So she was attempting to draw, herself and her skin color. I would love to tell you, I must tell you one little anecdote, a personal anecdote that struck me. I wondered, a few people wrote and said, is this happening in Canadian schools? And I said, yes, I believe it is. I believe it is. But it came home to me in a personal way, because last summer, my youngest granddaughter is 8 years old, and she goes to a very good public school in Toronto. It's a public school, not a private school. And she was at our house with her mother, and they were doing a big crossword puzzle. In their family, crossword puzzles are a big thing. I can't do them. I'm totally spatial perception or whatever. But anyways, it was, and I thought, wow, she's going to be helping to do this very large puzzle. And it was a picture of a cat's face, and the whole background was black. Like it was, so the face was, in the middle of a big background. I said, wow, to my daughter-in-law, this is a hard puzzle, because at least 50% of the puzzle, it seems to me, are just all black pieces. So how are you going to fit them together if you can't see, so we discussed this for a few minutes, yes, it is very difficult. And my little granddaughter suddenly pipes up, "This sounds like racism to me."
Oh, no.
Because we kept using the word black for the puzzle pieces.
Right.
And I thought to myself, that was very startling to me, because the fact that the word black to her has only one overwhelming
Yes,
association.
it now
that
represents
is,
something else than just a
it
just a
represents
color.
racism.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
it's never you. I mean, that it would be the first thing that would pop into her head. And you could see she felt uncomfortable that we were discussing a jigsaw puzzle using the word black again and again, as if we were being racist to the puzzle. Or I got a little chill. I said, I just wonder what kind of conversations they're having in her, I think she's grade 2 now.
Yeah.
And I was very unhappy about that. And I do believe these conversations are going on in both public and private schools. And I think some people sent their kids to private schools to avoid this trend, but it's everywhere now.
Okay, so we are running out of time, but I really want to get to the heart of the matter, which is the parents that are deciding to fight back against this. They have a group called FAIR, right? So FAIR, which stands for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. So can you tell us what kinds of people are on this group, on this board, and what are their goals?
All right, the first thing I'm going to do, since we're running out of time, is to suggest that it's a wonderful thing that this parent, Mr. Bartning, started. And the website is fairforall.org. And I would encourage you to go to that website and look at their illustrious board of advisors. It's 31 people. About a third of them, I would say, are Black, Hispanic, or Jewish, or some other ethnicity. It's a very representative American group of people, and all of them, like Steven Pinker and Megyn Kelly is on it, and this Barry Weiss is on it. John McWhorter. There are some Black conservative intellectuals who I follow and have just the highest regard for, and they're all accomplished, writers, entrepreneurs, scientists. So this is a very solid group of people, and what they are going to do, one of their primary goals is to help parents who are concerned but who feel that they are isolated. They're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to be the only one. They want to help people form small groups so that they can put pressure on these schools as groups. One individual, you saw Mr. Bartning was asked if maybe he should think about taking his child out of the school. Well, if 10 parents came up to them out of a class of 30, then they couldn't very well say, why don't you 10 take your kids out of the school? And they are going to help with legal, to make some of these cases really are quite unconstitutional, what is happening. And they would like to see some of these cases go to the Supreme Court of children being compelled, say, to take unconscious bias training, or there's lots of things that could be cited as unconstitutional and declared unconstitutional. And that would really put a monkey wrench into the works of these activist agendas. They have all kinds of programs they'd like to do. So I would only encourage your audience to tune into their website. It's all explained there. They are Martin Luther King fans, like I am, and you are, I'm sure. And they have a wonderful agenda. So I could only hope. I ended my column by saying maybe they would like to start a Canadian franchise, because we do have wonderful dissidents here who would, they have the right ideas and they have the energy and the dynamism, but there's too few, and they need to, it's all about numbers, isn't it, when you want to make a dent, in a bad trend. So that's my spiel.
Yeah, I think the ideology has the right idea to combat intolerance and racism, but I think what it ends up doing is like you said, it starts pitting certain groups against the other, and then you actually start you start seeing color, whereas maybe before you even didn't. So it's kind of
I'm all
ironic.
for fighting. I'm all for fighting intolerance. I think we all are. That goes without saying. But there's good ways and there's bad ways, and this is just seriously a bad way. And we already had the right way. We already had the right way, and it was the liberal way of treating people as individuals and trying not to let color come between you. This is insisting on having color come between us, and it's a surefire recipe for resentment amongst those who are told they have the original sin of racism that they can never, ever really get rid of. That is the message that white people are getting, and white children, worse. Adults can push back in their heads, but children, if they're told this when they're 5 years old, what kind of adults are you going to turn out?
They're so impressionable at that age. Such an interesting topic. We could go on all day, but we are unfortunately out of time. Thanks so much for being with us today, Barbara. Barbara Kay is an award-winning columnist with the National Post. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.